Coaching in Session,
your exclusive destination for unparalleled personal and professional growth.
With your host, Michael Rearden.
Whether you choose to live within limits or break free, your mindset journey begins here.
One of the reasons why I like how I do the podcast is because I'm able to be flexible in the topics that I'm going to be talking about and also the guests that I'm going to be presenting to you. It's almost like the sequence of what is possible comes next. If you ever play the game of Tetris, on the right side, I believe, most of the time, it tells you what shape is coming next. It helps you prepare better for your moves in the game. In life, we don't necessarily get those same type of benefits, right? We don't necessarily see the next piece of the puzzle. We don't see the next move, really. Of course, we can anticipate things, we can plan for things, and maybe we can even hope and wish for things, right? But the reality is there's something that we don't know what's going to come next, because the beauty of life is the moment that we're in. Now, of course, people are going to look at the future. They're going to see all of the things they want to create. Maybe you're very young right now, right? You're just in first grade or second grade or something along those lines. And you are just doing your concerts, your Christmas concerts, you're third grade, you're doing a recorder concert. You might have art shows and exhibits. You're doing PE field days, all of these fun things that happen in school. And then, of course, you might be on some teams, soccer team, basketball teams. Maybe you're in dance or something along those lines. So there's a lot of things for you to experience. Now we fast forward to the teen years. We're trying to keep up with our friends, get our learner's permit to drive, ask mom and dad for a car or something along those lines, going to the store, keeping up with the trends, whether they be fashion or technology-based trends. I know TikTok, they would do TikTok dances and things along those lines. I'm not sure if that's still a thing. But the reality is that you are preoccupied with something. Then we fast forward to maybe our early 20s. You're going to maybe be like finishing up college or looking at college or looking at your career, looking at life or looking at starting a family. And there's so many different avenues for you to go on. Well, which avenue is for you, right? Because we come from, a very simple life growing up. For the most of us, we're just kind of figuring out what shows we want to watch or, what games we want or, what we're going to put on the list for Santa to give us, something along those lines. I mean, life was simple, but then we fast forward to adults and the majority of our audience are going to be, again, adults. But I know there's many parents who love to have their children listen and just to kind of tune into some episodes, especially if there's a message here for them. And the message is simple on this episode here, is that the journey of life is going to be ours, but we have to be deliberate in how we step on that journey. What does that mean? We all have a destiny. We all have a book that can be filled, right? That's life. We all can one day fill up a journal or create an autobiography book of our life. Now, there's two schools of thought here. Number one, is it worth reading? And then maybe the next school of thought for some people, is it even worth writing? Because if it's not worth reading, then why write it? And then you have to even go a step further, because again, this is a mindset podcast. If you are not concerned about writing or reading this autobiography, can you truly be satisfied with your life? Now, we can fast forward to maybe days of purpose, and days of purpose are going to be where we feel overly joyous on what is to come. This happens a lot with parents. When they have a new child that's born into their life, everything changes. It's like, man, all the emotions that come your way, it's like now you have a little human being that is depending on you. Because at some point you might have been depending on a guardian figure, parents, grandparents, whoever it be, and you graduate from them and you go off into the world, right? You figure out what is your journey. But then sometimes someone's going to say, I don't want my journey to be by myself. So you get a partner and you start a family, whether it be a blood family or a family that you adopt. something happens now. It's like now there's even more purpose to your life, because before you were just kind of going off making money and thinking about, what you're going to do next. We can figure out how life can be that journey. And I think of we're trying to figure out, like our good and bad in life. Most of us have a story that can be told right now. And imagine if I said, I only want to hear your bad story. I don't want to hear a good story. I don't want to hear the happy ending. I just want to hear all the bad moments in your life. What would those moments be? Now, I know you might think of, oh, Michael, you need to be positive. And I already talked about the positive side of negativity on the podcast as a blog. You can search it on our website, Google, whatever. You're going to find that there is a power in being negative. Now, this is not to say that we're going to be all depressed and pessimistic and we're going to wallow into these pits of negativity that have been in our life. This is a stepping stone for us because we have to graduate from maybe our past. This happens with therapy. Typically, a person who's in therapy, they're in therapy for, 2-3 years sometimes. And maybe they graduate from therapy. And I think of it was a image consultant. He's no longer alive. Kevin Samuels, you might know him. He was a guy who people didn't like because he was very blunt, right? You talk about sugar and spice. He was spicy. And he would just say, this is what is happening. He would talk to women who were single or single moms or whatever it be. And he was just very forward. He would just say, well, I guess you're going to get the leftovers. Or like, why would another guy want you? Or something along those lines. Why are you not with the baby daddy? Or, why are you picking all these wrong men, right? So he was very forward into how you're operating. I like to be forward to a degree, but I don't find it necessarily helpful to kind of, put all your dirty laundry out there to make it seem like it belittles you, right? What today's exercise is we look at that negativity, all the bad moments in your life, and then I just want you to say this simple phrase as soon as you're done with it. I'm still alive. Now, you might be bruised and battered, right? You might be scarred and mentally drained. You might be fearful for your life or whatever emotions you can possibly be feeling, but you are alive. You are able to listen to this episode and you get to say, I get to wallow into this negativity and stay in there forever, or I get to make something better. Because now you know what you don't want. I know when it comes to, people, many people think they know what they want. They think they want a fast car. They think they want a big house or something along those lines. But let me tell you something about fast cars. You have to pay premium gas. And if gas is high and you don't have any money, now you're paying more for gas that you don't necessarily have the funds for. Now, maybe money is not an issue, right? Okay, well, let's fast forward. Maybe you're driving on a busy highway. You're living in New York, somewhere in California, like Los Angeles. And yes, you have all these fancy cars and fast cars, but there's no room for the speed, right? There's this bumper to bumper traffic. Doesn't matter how fast your car can go. Doesn't matter that you're always, idling, wasting your premium gasoline. Well, some people, they just, need it as a sentiment of, I accomplished this. I got this big house. I got this fast car. And all of these are great things, right? But I say the house that you don't clean, is it really a home? Right? Because now you just have four walls that are filled with junk, filled with dirt and dust, debris that no longer serve you or doesn't serve a purpose in your life. I would rather you live in a nice apartment that you can manage. What can you manage today? The journey. What can you take on? What do you have to relinquish? I think of when people are like hiking, right? They're hiking Everest or they're hiking and they're doing some type of journey. Maybe they're fighting for their life, survival. They relinquish the things that no longer serve them. They say, you know what? This air tank is empty. I'm not going to bring it down again. They just let it go. They just, leave it on the side or whatever. It serves no purpose. I understand it's littering, right? But how many bodies are on Everest? How many, debris and garbages and empty tanks are going to be on that mountain? And maybe at some point, there's going to be, too much and the mountain's just going to be filled with trash. But that's going to be maybe many, many, many years down the road, because how many people are truly trying to climb Mount Everest when they know how difficult it is? This is challenging. Most people don't want to walk to the mailbox, let alone walk up a hill. And talk about walking up Mount Everest now. Most people wouldn't even fathom to go on that journey. But then, of course, there's going to be the people who do. And we watch the videos of them and they're struggling and they get to the top and they're so happy. And maybe something on the inside of our minds or, in our souls or our bodies, we might say, oh, that would be a nice goal to do that or to try that. Because we can look at all the moments that are going to make us seemingly happy. But then somewhere down the road, we just kind of, get busy again. How many of you get busy where you forget to pay attention? I have very young kids right now. They're, young, below 5 from this recording. They grow up so quickly. My son, he is doing all the wrong things because he's like the terrible 3s. It's not the terrible 2s. People will say it's the terrible 2s, but it's the terrible 3s. And every time I talk to parents, I say, it's the terrible 2s or terrible 3s. And they always say terrible 3s. And I'm like, okay, cool, right? I've worked with children all my life, like teaching them to swim and, working with them, music, etc. But when you have your own, you have to be with them like 24/7 almost all the time, like watching them. It's a different beast. So now when I'm dealing with these terrible 3s, I'm like, man, was I like this too when I was 3? Most likely I was, right? I was probably even worse. And so I appreciate, this part of my journey. I appreciate the hardship. But most people, when it comes to hard moments in their life, they would rather not feel them. They would rather throw them to the side and say, you know what? I don't want to deal with this. Let me get a babysitter. Let me give them to grandma and grandpa or something along those lines. But then you know what grandma and grandpa do to kind of get payback, especially when you're leaving them around the terrible 3s? They load them up on candy and soda because they'll be the best, boy or girl for grandma and grandpa, or, while they're getting, a steady stream of soda and a steady stream of candy. But in the moment they go home, the dam is released and chaos is going to ensue. So we have a choice now, right? We can just take everything that we get and we can say, okay, well, this is not perfect, but it is what I have. Or we can just say, you know what? I'm not even going to try. And how many people don't even try? How many people don't look at their negativities, don't look at their past failures and say, okay, I failed there. How can I succeed? How can I win? Our world today is filled with so much commotion and so much stress and so much volatility. It is difficult for a person to, really sit down and be still with themselves. There's always going to be a noise, it seems, that's humming in your ear. There's always going to be a problem that is demanding your attention. If we can just slow down and say, you know what, this is nice, this is life. Imagine what we can plan for. The journey that we are going to go on, the journey that we can prepare for, can be the journey of a lifetime. Because I don't think everyone's journey is equal. And it's not for me to say that one life is better or more beneficial than another. But if I had to look at the greatest people in the world, I would think of Thomas Edison. I would think of people who invented great things in the world. I might look at world leaders like presidents that have made a difference with their laws and things like that. I might look at technology like the automobile of Henry Ford, things along those lines. And so we look at the inception of something great that really transitioned the world for development. Because a car from a horse and buggy is a huge upgrade, and in the sense of you can get somewhere so much quicker because now you don't have to feed the horses. Now you don't have to, manage the horses, making sure they're okay, they're fed, water, things like that. The only thing you have to do is make sure your car has oil and gas, right? And make sure the tires are good to go. So the upkeep might seem the same, but there's not a living aspect or a component to that horse-drawn wagon, right? The car is just an inanimate object. And we forget that technology, the technological advances that we have had has helped us live more fully because now we don't have to be as immersed. So it's almost like a backwards type of journey now, because the journey that we once had, right? We would have to walk to school. And now we can take an Uber to school, right? There's no journey there. Maybe we would have to go to the grocery store every day, to get our food because there was no refrigeration or something. But now we have refrigerators and we have processed food that can last weeks and months at a time. So we don't have to go to the grocery store every single day. So that journey is kind of gone, right? And I'm not saying that we need to go to the grocery store every day to have a fulfilled life or to do all these mundane tasks that take up so much of our time. Because if we're not spending time on that, what are we spending time on? Because we all have 24 hours a day, and we can look at the top 1% of people who can use the 24 hours and leverage it to something beneficial to themselves and to the ones that are around them. And then we can look at how people are living in the 24 hours and how they waste it on their phones. And I'm not saying that you can't watch a show and you can't watch a series and you can't watch movies. This is all to say that the journey of life is yours. You get to choose to sit down and take a break, or you get to choose to keep on walking up to the peak. This is why when many people, they're looking for personal development or self-help, they're trying to get the quick fix, right? What can be so quick that's going to help me boost up my, I guess you could say, current circumstance that is going to be immediate gratification versus the hard work aspect of what I would like to have in my life. Most people, they would love to have the quick fixes in their life. But the reality is, will that make a meaningful journey or a story, right? Imagine a book like Harry Potter or something like, people loved Harry Potter not because it was, full of magic, which what was one of the reasons, of course, but it was because of his journey. He was sleeping under the stairwell of, like a home that, he wasn't getting the love and the appreciation as his cousins or whoever was in the household. His journey in the beginning wasn't so great, but then it started to get better, right? Now he's flying on brooms and he has a magic wand and he's able to, boom, magic. But the reality was, in the beginning, it wasn't so great. And then it got really good. But then you can go down the, series of books or even the movies. And now he has to fight all of these villains and, there's all of these problems. And that's his journey, right? Do you think Harry might have thought about just staying underneath that stairwell? Or maybe not having magic anymore? No, he accepted his journey. Of course, there's going to be moments maybe when there's some doubt. Maybe when there's some concerns that, is this future really for me? And I can't tell you how many people are afraid to take action because they're afraid to make the wrong decision. So if we are clear on the possibilities of what our life can be, imagine what we can do with our life. Because I'm not saying you have to be everyone and everything all at once, but what I'm saying is we can be deliberate today. If we want to make some changes in our life, we are deliberate. We understand what the expectations are, very similar to how when we're younger, the expectations are given to us. When we are teens, the expectations are given to us, and it's a choice for us to either to follow them or not to follow them. And then somewhere, between our early teens and maybe even mid-30s, we are left with a decision to either show up or to not show up. And I can't tell you how many people are just kind of living on autopilot. They accept what they get. And they might have given themselves a cube, right? A box of what they can do and what they can't do. And often the cube for what they can do is a lot more than what they can do. So maybe they go to school. College is a great thing if you want to be like a lawyer or something along those lines, doctor, etc. But it can be a debilitating thing if you are just going to get a degree in business or something like that, right? What does that mean for you, right? What do you want to do with that degree, right? With that piece of paper, with that education? Some people, they might be an accountant. Some people might be financial advisors, things along those lines. But then you do have to ask yourself a question. Is this a job or is this a career, right? Because a job will get you by, but a career will get you through. And it's just a fancy way to say that a career is going to help you get to the next stage. So we don't have to necessarily have a career that we say, okay, this is my career and it's always going to be my career. Very similar to how I was a teacher. And I said, you know what? Teaching is great. I love this aspect, but there has to be like an alternative route, a different way to do things. And I said, well, what can I do? And I said, well, start a coaching company. Coaching company is great. But then I said, you know what? The coaching company is nice and all, but what would be something that is always going to be there, right? Because a coaching company, you always need a coach. But then I said, I can always, develop something where it's always going to be available to anyone, no matter their financial situation. It just depends on what they want to attain. Because some people, they want goodness. They want to win in their life. So they will do the work naturally rather than just passively. Because most people would love to have a passive, boost of income or a boost of relationships or love or whatever it be. But you do have to put in the work. So coaching in session is, again, a podcast where it's extremely flexible, where people can come in, they take what they need. They don't have to take everything, because something I said in this episode might have resonated with you. And that is the key. It doesn't have to be the whole episode. It's literally just one thing. It's called the flakes, like the flakes of gold. You listen to enough episodes, eventually you're going to have a gold bar. And that gold bar is going to buy the life that you want. Now, buying the life that you want is figurative, right? Because if I say, the life that you want might be, you want to, start a company that deals with, rescuing animals from abusive homes or something like that, right? For most people, that might not be their dream. But for you, it could be. It could be starting a pizza joint, a restaurant, or something like that. You love to cook. You want to share your love of cooking with people. Maybe you want to have a new technology company, creating cell phones that are able to be like service dogs or something like that, so they can tell when something is wrong, right? AI and technology might be able to do that right now. The reality is you can create and do whatever you want. There's not enough cars, there's not enough airplanes. There's always something that can be improved upon. I can't tell you how many times people thought like, oh, this must be it. This is perfect, right? They have a nice car, they have a nice home or something like that. And it seems like this is it, right? This is the trend, right? We look at MP3 players, we look at CD players, we look at cassette players, going down the line backwards of how technology and music was, and then records. So people would, get a big record collection and then they get big DVDs and VHS collections because they think that this is it, right? This is life. And I remember when I was young and I was like, oh man, I'm going to get a DVD collection. I'm going to get all of these different things because that is what my mind was at the time. And now everything is digital. Everything is kind of up in the cloud and up in the air. So it creates a bit of hardship in creating some transparency or clarity in what you want to do, because everything is just kind of, vague. And so we can live a life full of vagueness, or we can say, let's become more deliberate. So what is that deliberate for you? Because if you did the work already and you wrote down everything that you didn't like in your life, the negative moments, maybe, divorce or something like that, you lost a family member that you love so much or something like that, you lost your dream job, you crashed your dream car, right? Whatever the negativity is, right? You write it down. And then I want you to next to those things, or just kind of number whatever you wrote down negative. If it's a paragraph, just kind of continue with the paragraph, of course, and just write down what you learn from those negativities, right? And then what you would like from those learnings to instill into your future, right? So it's basically a 3-step process, right? You write down what the negativities were, what you learned from it, and then what you learned, how it can help you in some areas of your life. Because, for example, maybe you go to the casino and you spend a bunch of money and you lose it all, right? And the reason you lost it all wasn't because the casinos were cheating, but because you didn't know how to play the games. So the negativity was that you went to the casino and lost all the money. The learning was that you learned how to play the games. And so now the goal might be that you want to go back, since you know how to play the games, and beat the casino now. That could be the goal, right? And it doesn't have to be as simple as that. It can be about life. It could be about your business. It could be about your relationships. It could be about whatever you want. but you have to figure out your failures. You have to figure out what you learn from them. And then you can now understand what you want. Because I find that the power doesn't come always in thinking about what you think you want, but understanding that you have lived it. And then you know that this is, something you want, right? A kid that you give ice cream might say, I want ice cream, because they know that sugar feels good. But then I think of, like a kid who's real young and they see this, ice cream and they're like, I don't know what that is. That doesn't look too appetizing. Very similar to spinach and green beans and something green. It might not be appetizing and interesting to them. Of course, they can develop a palate and you can just kind of say, well, this is what we're eating, and you create the mindset. But the reality is, when people are moving through life, they are accustomed to certain things. So most people, they don't even leave their town that they grew up in, their state that they have lived in all their life. It's because they have grown accustomed to that. So what have you grown accustomed to on your journey? What have you grown accustomed to in your life? And then I want you to try to, disassociate it, but not forget it. I want you to try new things. I want you to experience what life can have. Again, you don't have to, be climbing Mount Everest, because your Mount Everest might be something different. You don't have to, train for Mount Everest if you are just going to open up a pizza spot. Now, of course, the pizza spot can be your Mount Everest. It can be your, giant leap forward. But there's just so much to be said about what your journey can be. It can be good. It can be bad. It could be fulfilling. And if you maybe are struggling on that aspect of a journey, or where you need to focus on, there are certain areas of your life where you're confused on, where you're seeking affection or joy, or you're seeking outside stimuluses that, again, might feel good in the moment, but they won't feel good long term. So the journey is not so much only about the moment, even though the moment is all we have right now. It is about planning for the future. It's about planning for what is possible, what is next, because the flexibility of what you can do and accomplish in life is all up to your mind. And you have the choice to give it limits or to give it freedom. And if you can choose to give it freedom and a mindset that has no limits and all but possibilities, the world can be whatever you want it to be.